In London, this is The Economist. When criminals are heavily armed, the police understandably want to be heavily armed too to protect themselves. But there's been a huge rise in the number of SWAT raids in recent years, and some say it's gone too far. I'm Robert Guest, The Economist's US editor, and I'm joined on the line by John Fassman, our correspondent in Atlanta. John, can you explain to our foreign listeners exactly what a SWAT team is?
SWAT stands for Special Weapons and Tactics, and it refers to paramilitary units of police forces. These are policemen who carry military-grade weapons, assault rifles and things like that, often travel in armored personnel carriers. And it was created, the first SWAT team was created in Los Angeles in the late 1960s to respond to violent civil unrest. And the idea was that police needed a unit that could respond to situations, hostage situations, people barricaded in buildings, that could respond with overwhelming force. The problem is that you've gone from having a few hundred raids a year in the 1970s to about 100 a day. And most of these are not in response to life-threatening situations. Most of these are drug warrants being served on private residences.
So you mean it's not that the suspected criminal in the house has threatened to kill anyone or is known to be violent, but simply that the police wish to serve a warrant on him and they choose to do it by sending in a heavily armed SWAT team. Is that right?
Right. You have a warrant that says, this person may have a half dozen marijuana plants in his basement. And so instead of sending 2 or 4 police officers, you send a 16-person SWAT team in an armored personnel carrier, and they serve the warrants usually very early in the morning. Often they'll bang down the door and throw in a flashbang grenade, which is designed to blind and deafen the people inside. Radley Balco, who has released a book on police militarization called Rise of the Warrior Cop, has counted 50 innocent people killed in botched SWAT raids.
Apart from serving drug warrants, what else are these SWAT raids used for?
Well, there's been a tremendous amount of mission creep. Police in Baltimore, Dallas, and South Carolina have all used SWAT units to break up poker games because the poker games are illegal. In 2006, immigration police, wearing full riot gear and heavily armed, arrested 6 Tibetan Buddhist monks in Nebraska who had overstayed their visa. In 2011, heavily armed police raided barbershops near Orlando, Florida, and arrested 34 people for barbering without licenses. SWAT teams have been sent to raid bars suspected of serving alcohol to underage patrons. And in Arlington, Texas, they were sent essentially to enforce code compliance on an organic farm that had left messy stuff in their yard.
That's incredible. What's causing this mission creep? Why have SWAT tactics spread so far from their original purpose?
Let's first establish they have not spread in response to a rise in crime. They have ballooned between 1980 and 2007, and during that time, violent crime has fallen in the United States. The reason they seem to have risen is simply because there are more SWAT teams now than there were. Now, a majority not only of big cities have SWAT teams, but a majority of towns with populations under 50,000 have their own SWAT teams or are part of a sort of joint municipal SWAT force that exists in their area and can be called out.
Has the enormous rise in spending on homeland security since 9/11 played a role?
Yes, Senator Tom Coburn from Oklahoma released a report in 2012 that said that between 2001 and 2011, the Department of Homeland Security has spent over $35 billion on grants to state and local police departments.
And what's the money been spent on?
Well, it's been spent on a lot of things. It's been spent on, body armor. It's been spent on computers. It's been spent on technical equipment. A lot of it has been spent on weapons and military-type toys of really dubious need. There's a town in New Hampshire called Keene, which has averaged fewer than 2 homicides a year going back to the early 90s. And they spent $285,000 on a Bearcat, which is an armored personnel carrier with a turret that their police chief said they needed to guard their pumpkin festival and other dangerous events.
I remember interviewing a policeman once who had been head of a SWAT team, and he told me that his time running a SWAT team was the most enjoyable time of his life. And while obviously one would like people to enjoy their jobs, this did strike me as a little bit worrying. SWAT tactics are the sorts of things that one would hope are being used in extreme circumstances, not and just because they're fun. How much oversight is there over the expansion of SWAT tactics?
There's no national reporting requirement. There are certain states that have started doing some very promising things. In 2009, Maryland's Governor Martin O'Malley signed into law a bill requiring police departments in the state to report twice a year on SWAT deployments, and they have to report how often they were deployed and for what reasons. Now, the hope behind this bill, I think, was that as people saw how often SWAT teams were deployed and for what reason, that there would be public pressure to bring down the number of deployments and to really get back to the original mission of SWAT. Unfortunately, so far that has not been the case. The numbers have stayed pretty steady. The important thing to remember is that this is not an argument that SWAT should be disbanded or that police shouldn't have SWAT teams. Police need SWAT teams. When there is a life-threatening situation, you want police to be able to guard the public and to be able to go in with overwhelming force. But you also want individual police departments to think very carefully about what the mission of police is. And the concern is that as police sort of tend to get more militarized, policemen start behaving more like soldiers. And you've got to remember that the mission of those two groups are completely different. The mission of a police officer is to protect and serve the community in which he, I hope, lives, or at least lives near. The mission of a soldier going into battle is to annihilate an enemy. And the more police act like soldiers, the worse it is for American civil liberties.
Thanks very much, John. That was John Fassman, our Atlanta correspondent. In London, this is The Economist.
The Economist.